All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books. Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. I am so excited to be here with all of you this afternoon to present speculative fiction Remaking the World. We're here with three of my favorite authors, Tananarive Due, Adrienne Maree Brown, and Kung Lee Sun. And we're going to talk about how speculative fiction is a portal to different timelines, past, present, and future, and how those timelines might help us make sense of today. So in the Reformatory, Tananarive Due brings haints and ghosts in to tell the real-life horror story of Florida's Dozier School for boys. In Adrienne Maree Brown's Grievers trilogy, the radical lessons of Detroit's grassroots movements guide Dune to find and remake community in the wake of a devastating virus. And in Begin the World Over, Kung Lee's Sun gives a counterfactual of the founder's greatest fear, that Black and Indigenous people might join forces to undo the newly formed United States of America. We are in great need of new ways to tell this country's deeper truths about both the persistent and present cruelty of and the courage of those who resist. Join us for this special lunchtime event today. Get your brown bag out if you have it, or just kick back and relax. And, let's listen and think about how these folks use speculative fiction to find the cracks in the hegemony and force them open. So I'm going to introduce Tananarive first. Tananarive is an award-winning author who teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. Her stories have been featured on LeVar Burton Reads and Brelm, and she is an executive producer on Shudder's documentary Horror Noir, The History of Black Horror. Due and her husband, collaborator Stephen Barnes, wrote for Jordan Peele's The Twilight Zone and for Shudder's anthology film Horror Noir. They also co-wrote the Black horror graphic novel The Keeper, illustrated by Marco Finnegan. Due and Barnes co-host a podcast, Life Writing, Write for Your Life, which I listen to all the time and love. But more important than all of that, Due is really the godmother of so many books that are out today. Due paved the way for, so many people who are in the horror and speculative writing space. So I'm not going to list all of your books because there's too many to name, but so many of my favorites. And of course, The Reformatory is the most recent that we have gotten to celebrate. Adrienne Maree Brown grows healing ideas in public through her writing, which includes short and long form fiction, nonfiction, and spells, tarot decks, and poetry. Her music, which includes songwriting, singing, and an upcoming immersive musical ritual, and her podcasts, including How to Survive the End of the World, Octavia's Parables, and the Emergent Strategy podcast, all of which are Charis faves and personal faves. Adrienne has nurtured emergent strategy, pleasure activism, radical imagination, and transformative justice as ideas, frameworks, networks, and practices for transformation. Her work is informed by 25 years of social and environmental justice facilitation, primarily supporting Black liberation. Her path of teaching somatics, her love of Octavia E. Butler, and visionary fiction, and her work as a doula. She's the author of several published texts, including Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds, Pleasure Activism, The Politics of Feeling Good, Grievers, and Maroons, the first two novellas of her speculative fiction trilogy, which we'll be talking about today. And last but not least is Kung Lee Sun, who uses she, he, or they pronouns. Kung Lee is a lifelong Southerner currently based on the Gulf Coast. As a public interest attorney in Atlanta, she brought class action lawsuits on behalf of people in prisons and jails. He left lawyering to support undocumented and abolitionist organizers as a strategist and trainer to write. Begin the World Over is their first book, and Kung Lee is a longtime Charis friend and collaborator and thinker. So we are always grateful for Kung Lee to bring us together. And Kung Lee is the reason that we are doing this today. So thank you, Kung Lee. We want to invite folks to shout out where you're watching from in the chat. If you have questions, pop them in there. But we want to get right into it. So I'm going to get out of the way, but just endless gratitude for all of the generative and important ideas that y'all bring into the world. Charis is turning 50 this year, and we just solidified our theme from Parable of the Talents to take root in the stars. So we are really excited about the ideas that are going to come out of this. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ER. Thank you, ER. I feel like Charis should always get their own introduction as well, right? Because
amazing.
An amazing institution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and y'all got me up early today. It's 9 o'clock on the West Coast, but this is love for Charis.
Wake up early, be ready to go.
Shall we say just how we are? You're in the earliest morning time, Tananarive.
Well, yeah, while the alertness lasts. No, I'm kidding. I hesitate to use the word students, but I am honored to have mentored both of these two, not just fantastic writers, but what I really, really admire about both of you is how you walk in the world. You know, so much of my activism is in my writing, and then the rest is in parenting. You know, so to see an attorney, or to see you, Adrienne, going out with your workshops and actually touching and feeling the world reminds me so much of the civil rights activist parents I had and still have. My dad is 89. So it's just a joy to be here with you and to talk about the ways that we also try to use art to change the world.
Adrienne, how are you?
I'm very excited to be here. This is like the first event I'm doing for 2024. I've been very sick this year so far, which I think there's lots of reasons for. But, you know, Tananarive, I always think about your characters and how the world manifests into their wellness and their powers. And I keep being like, some power is about to fucking unlock because I've been sick for so long that I'm probably becoming a spider or something. Something major is unlocking. I'm super grateful to be here. I said this in my announcement about this event, but for me, this feels very full circle because to sit here as a fiction writer with Tananarive, who's one of the first people to ever read my fiction, give me feedback on my fiction. I honor you all the time when I talk about it because I'm like, I was writing beautiful dialogues between people, you know, in white rooms, and you showed up and you were like, and where are they? What does it look like around them? Are they in a city, country? You know, just like basic things that like transformed how I approached what I was writing. I was like, oh, the environment can say as much as the people do. And then to have Kung Lee, who is the first fiction that was published in the Emergent Strategy series, and that both of the books that y'all have put into this, you know, these two books that we're talking about are mind-blowing, necessary books that feel really relevant in this particular moment when it comes to talking about justice and revolution. So I'm just like happy. Because I'm sick, I'm like, if I'll try to use the mute button if any coughing happens. And so I feel like even coughing through the virtual will make other people sick. So I'm like,
we also would probably feel that way. No, I'm kidding.
You know, I'm like, look, try to keep the people healthy and safe. But I'm really like, I'm upright. And people are like, can you clear out your day? You're coughing. I was like, I can clear out most things. But there's one thing that's happening today that's just like, not clearable. I need to be there. So, okay. And Kung Lee, the way the light is touching you right now is like, it's wonderful. Like, I don't know if you coordinated that with the sun or like what.
Yeah, but we had an arrangement.
Yeah, it's good.
It's the good Florida sun.
It's good. Yeah. It's cinematic. But how are you?
I mean, this is just wonderful to be here, to get to see both of you. You know, that book, Adrienne, I don't think I knew you when Octavius Brood came out.
Yeah, I don't think we'd met. I think I had heard, maybe you were already doing Queer Fit. Like, I feel like I had maybe heard of you on the outer edges of life, but we didn't know each other yet.
Yeah, but that book made me be like the premise of it, or the, you know, how you, that collection, you're like, organizers dream new worlds all the time, and that we need to write them. And I think that was like, what got me started thinking, yes, we're always trying for this new world, but I can't actually write. All I've been doing writing briefs is writing the horror. And then we now write the good ending, the victory. And it's so, I was like, we could do it in a short story. And it just took a whole, you have to write a whole new book. I mean, a whole world to do that.
Yeah.
Isn't it revolutionary to think of the good ending, though? I mean,
Yes.
honestly, the more you know about the atrocities that actually do happen in the world, the happy ending, the good ending is itself revolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it actually kind of blows my mind at any time when we're in a crisis that feels unsolvable. I've been like rocking something from Palestine every day on my body just because I'm like, I need to know Palestine is continuing even in the face of what's happening. And there's so many things like that where I'm like, there's so many things where it feels like, oh, we don't have yet the power to stop and to change and to shape things the way we want to. But if we just get focused on that, that's all we will see. And that's all we will reinforce is the not power and the giving up. And it's like to look at that instead and say, what would have to be different in order for us to right now be able to make this intervention in Palestine? And how do I start to live into that difference? Like, that's the thinking to me behind all the work that we're doing is like, well, what would need to change? Can I write that story? What would the people be like? Who would ask the question? I mean, Tananarive, I keep thinking about your work with this reformatory piece because I remember when you started down this path.
Long time ago,
but it was like, you were like, there's something going on here. And my family member was impacted by it. And I'm going to go sleuth and I'm going to figure this out. And I'm going to tell this story. Like, and to me, I'm just like, that's the essence. That's like, that is such a healing move.
I had to. I really had to. I mean, there's so many thoughts right now. But briefly, the Reformatory is about a 12-year-old boy who is unfairly, as you would imagine, in Jim Crow, Florida, locked up in a notorious reformatory that is haunted. And there are ghosts there, and he has a gift for seeing ghosts. So the story braids his horrors that are both human and supernatural inside of the reformatory while his 17-year-old sister tries to free him. And the sister Gloria was very much based on my late mother, Patricia Gloria Stevens Due. And as you talk about activism, I'm thinking about how it is young people who are always at the forefront of change. Not that older people can't, but there's something that happens. We get jaded, we get weary. We don't have the same peripheral vision that young people do. So what drove get comfortable. So what drove my mother, I mean, every time I had a question about what Gloria would do in this book, I just thought, what would my mother have done? Because she didn't have the sense to know better that she shouldn't go to the white only window and get an ice cream. I make a reference to that in the book, but that was true. She would just go to the white only window to get her ice cream, and her whole life, that was her sort of attitude. If something isn't right, she's going to stand up and be so courageous to fix it. And that optimism is what really drove me as the author through the writing of a very, very difficult story. And also drives change, So yes, young people are kind of shocking people on TikTok with their takes on Palestine because they're looking at this situation and saying, why? Whereas so many others have accommodated themselves to that situation, right? And to the point of someone who was speaking earlier before this began, there is some ignorance sewn in there. There is some anti-Semitism sewn in there that needs to be extracted. But the general attitude of like seeking a world that is righteous and protects children and protects communities is something that young people are so much more likely to stand up for. And when I see that activism happening, though it needs guidance at times, I'm so grateful. And it reminds me of what a joy it was to have child protagonists in such a difficult novel.
I love that. And maybe Kung Lee, like, could you tell us about before we begin the world over? Can you tell us a little bit about the story of that as well, and like kind of how you see the protagonist weaving into this moment?
Yeah, the Begin the World Over is in 1794 at this moment, where the American Revolution has happened, the Haitian Revolution has started, And the question is whether James Hemings, who is the enslaved real person, every named person in the book is a real historical figure, acting within the bounds of what we know about them. The enslaved chef of Thomas Jefferson has this opportunity to either join the revolution or to go back to his relatively comfortable, life, right? And I think this is a question right now that it really resonate with folks. Like James, in the end, is not the main character in the end. Like there's an ensemble group of revolutionaries and awesome, folks in the book, but James is the one that has to make that choice, and I think is the one that most people are like asking, do I take this route? Do I take that route?
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
I feel like in reading that text, there's so much in there that's, I keep thinking about the balance between individual choices and collective responsibility, and how so often when we're in oppression, it's like, oh, I'm in this circumstance. How do I survive? How do I get out of it? And it's like, oh, I have collective, like people are going to have to look out for me. I'm going to need the miracle of other people's attention to survive the circumstance. And I'm going to have to meet that with my own revolutionary capacity and my own sense of like, something's not right. And I feel like both of the books do very well. Like, I don't know what right would be necessarily. I don't know exactly what the whole system is going to look like, but I do know that it's worth the upheaval. It's worth turning upside down what's happening now and making it so that that's not the norm, is not possible. I'll speak now about the Grievers series that I've been working on. I just yesterday had a feedback conversation with my editor about the third book in the trilogy, which I turned in at the end of last year, and was like, it's such a weird, beautiful process. But I started writing this book back in like 2011, 2012 as a short story. Tananarive, that was one of the first beautiful pieces of advice you gave me, was like, any book you think you've got in you, find the short story to tell from it. And there should be many short stories to tell. And if you can't tell it as a short story, you don't actually have this, you don't have it yet, And it was such good practice. I apply that every time I'm starting off a new project, is like, what is the short story at the heart of this? Or what are the many short stories at the heart of this? And sometimes I can back into the whole thing that way. But with Grievers, it was, what happens if there's a plague that is happening to Black people inside of Detroit because of the amount of grief and the amount of unacknowledged and grief building changes that Black people have been asked to endure and survive in that city. And what happens if, if all of a sudden you're looking around and people have decided to opt out, or people are opting out, right? And they're opting out of their bodies, they're opting out of, which I was politicized in part by Grace Lee Boggs. And one of the things she always talked about was like, when kids are walking out of school, she's like, there's not dropping out. That's a walkout. Like, that's a political act. And so there was something in me that was like, what if we did that political act from our bodies? If we were like, you don't get to keep having Black people here to treat horribly. Like, what if there's another option for us? I'm still in the process of working it, but it has been really, similarly, this powerful experience of remembrance. Like, I think the idea of doing historical speculative fiction, where I'm like, I'm trying to remember this certain period in Detroit, where all the organizing that was happening was like, we have to organize outside of a context of capitalism. How do we do that? How do we survive even when there's no resources coming in? And isn't that maroonage? Isn't that basically what it means? We're going to slip away from the system that says it provides everything, and we're going to find a way to live in justice. So that's what I'm trying to play with. What I did accidentally in the second book was I wrote myself into utopia. And I didn't mean to. I didn't even notice it happening, that I was like, and then a magical wall appeared, and everyone's safe. And so now I have to get myself out of utopia in the third book and back into a future. But it's actually a beautiful healing like maroonage imagined or real life is such a beautiful process.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that so much through the work that each of us is doing.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to jump in for a second on the topic of remembrance.
Yes.
And how much of a literal guide it was for me in writing the Reformatory. I had a true life great uncle I only heard about after my mother passed away in 2013. I got a call from the Florida Attorney General's or State Attorney's office letting me know that his remains might be on the grounds of the Dozier School for Boys in Marianna, Florida. If you haven't heard of it, research it. It's a horrible, terrible place that was still in operation until 2011. And he actually did pass away. He was buried on those grounds.
Okay.
And not to be too macabre about it, but when they finally did exhume the remains, apparently he had an ear infection that was so bad that there was evidence of it in the bone, like that.
Oh,
Yeah, and he was allegedly stabbed to death by another child there, but you can't believe anything that comes out of that place. So part of my mission in the beginning was not literally to tell his story. I knew right away I could not tell this as memoir nonfiction. I just no, all of that to get to that ending. No, thank you. But I wanted to give him a better story while honoring the fact that he lived. And the way you call haints in the world of the story is to literally say their names because they have fallen from memory, and the sound of their names is so irresistible that they can come across the plane if you have haint sensitivities. But as I was working, it became broader than that. Actually, it was remembrance of the entire era. It was remembrance of my parents' activism as described by the work of my father, John Dorsey Due Jr., who's a character John Dorsey after him. My mother, my grandmother's house, Ms. Lottie, my grandmother's name is Lottie. The clutter in her house, the things in her kitchen that fewer and fewer people remain to remember, you know. But it's just when you hear young people say, I am not my ancestors. And again, this is not ignorance because they're not taught. We don't know. So walking through history, you know how they say 1 million people is a statistic, one person is a tragedy.
yes.
To walk through history through the eyes of one family that is dealing with every aspect of white supremacy, from the way white communities would drive out Black power with false accusations, Tulsa, Rosewood, the fear that permeated throughout other marginalized groups that can try to perform allyship but find themselves limited by their own fears, queer community, a Jewish community in Jim Crow Florida, and also the different Black people at all stages, like highly educated, just out of the army, to sharecroppers who make up these communities. And I wanted to try to bring that to life in an active remembrance, in the hope that, in understanding, yeah, we've always felt helpless, we've always felt afraid, but we've also always stood up.
Yeah.
Not everybody stands up, but we collectively, humanity, has always stood up.
Yeah, yeah. And Tananarive, it's like your mother in the book, Gloria, who's, you know, as the character Gloria, absolutely, it's like my favorite character in the book, because the nuances of what she was going through, how she was making her decisions, how she was heroic on the sort of, you know, the small details, like you're saying, Adrienne, like how do we make these decisions to go forward, really struck me. And it was also partly because I'm a beneficiary of your mother's work.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up
continuing her work.
Yes, well, in a different way, I'm a continuation of probably what your father's work was as a rights lawyer. But I grew up in Tallahassee, Florida, and was I think the second year after the schools were desegregated. So I went to public school, and I know your mother's work in Tallahassee. I often think of it as like I am a direct beneficiary of that movement there.
Wow,
that's amazing.
Yeah, and it's like you being able to write her in as Gloria was just that was the highlight of that book.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And in grieving her, it was a way to like Grievers.
Yes,
to remember, to bring, because if we remember, they're not quite gone, are they?
Right. I mean, I think that's when I was working on Grievers, I feel like I had been told, like, you're not supposed to go direct, you're not supposed to write people directly into your fiction. And I was like, but I have to.
Yeah.
These people are all based on people who lived in this city at this time. Some of them I extended their lives or made more overlap, and I also was like, I'm playing with the stories in a little bit different ways, but the memory of it for me, I think it also made me like, oh, the imprint of a life is more than the name or the knowing directly. Like, the imprint of a life is all these stories. And I'm like, the stories of the people who choose to move in a revolutionary direction or who choose to move towards change, I want to tell as many of those as I can, as intimately as possible. And I want to support as many of those coming into the world as possible. Kung Lee, like when Begin the World Over, when you shared it with me the first time, and I was like, oh, when people are like, how do revolutions happen? It's like, this is how they happen. And it's one individual at a time. Being moved by another individual at a time is how we actually create this collective possibility. And I think I'm always astounded by the fact that it's like, it actually doesn't take that many people, but the people do have to be glorious, right?
Yeah.
They do have to be, there do have to be people who are like lightning and who will come into a situation and be like, it's undeniable. What I want to happen here is undeniable. I even think it's inevitable. I want to bring as many people with me as possible. And that's how Begin the World Over feels.
Yeah.
To read. And it feels, I felt so inspired by it that I'm like, even our history, we can re-understand that it's like, there was a misturn. And this revolution could have taken off here, and look at that. Like, if that history could have shifted with just a few people making different decisions, what else could shift now?
Yeah. When I finished writing that story, I got very, very sad. I've told this before. It's like, I got very sad because I was like, we turned left instead of right, or, we made the wrong turn at that moment.
We turned right instead of left.
Instead of left. And I was like, oh, we missed it. But then, a little bit of time passed. And then it was when I realized all of the elements that were in place in the book, right? Because the book is all based on real events, real people, real, real circumstances. The spiritual basis of Sahoy, of the Muskogees, is still on this land. Right? Yes. The resistance of the Black revolutionaries is still on this land. Everything that was present in 1794, when we turned this way instead of that, is still present on this land.
Yes.
And it's like the importance of writing historical speculative fiction.
Yeah.
Right? There's no, it's just because you're working with what is present.
Yes.
What is still present.
And also, oh, sorry, Adrienne, you
go ahead.
And also, what is the future? Pointing toward the future in the way something like Daughters of the Dust, which is historical but future facing, is Afrofuturism, because it's in that space, past, present, and future simultaneously. Yes. I really wanted that in the Reformatory because, sadly, there are way more children behind bars today than there ever were in 1950. As horrible as Jim Crow was, I mean, in some ways you were behind bars in your own house, granted,
yes.
But the system is so much more sophisticated and so much more diabolical and militarized and profit-driven now than it was in 1950, that I know there are readers whose children have been sucked into juvenile justice, and then you're automatically isolated. Your lawyer says, don't talk about it.
Yep.
And it's like you're pulled out of normal life, and now you're up against this horrible, horrible system. I wanted people to recognize the present in the story. And my original ending, I don't want to be spoilery in case people haven't read it, was an image where Robert is thinking about a spaceship taking off for the moon. There's a scene where one of the characters has a television set, but there are no stations nearby, so all it can show is snow. It's just, I set this book intentionally before the death of Emmett Till, which a lot of people see is like one of the turning points that helped spur what we know as the modern civil rights movement, and then the bus boycotts, and then the sit-ins, and all this. So I wanted to show that time before all that started. As you said, Kung Lee, that turn, like they hadn't quite made that turn yet.
Yeah.
But it's the individuals like this who were ready to meet that moment, who were going to create that better future. Not perfect future, but a better future.
Yeah. I think that's, I feel like sometimes we romanticize how change happens, like where it comes from and who can start it. And I feel like part of what historical speculative fiction, to me, part of why I'm interested in it is I'm like, oh, it's always just a human being. Like it's always a human being. It's almost always someone who's going through a circumstance where they're being told that they are a victim or they are part of a community that is a victim and that does not have power. And I felt like I really wanted to explore that from within. Like, what if in every direction I look, all I can see is the story of my own victimhood and the victimhood of my people? I think about often now, I'm like, oh, times are so hard. I'm like, well, there was that period when people were like four generations into slavery with 4 generations to go. And there were still people in that period who believed that change could happen and that slavery could end, and they were working on it. And maybe they felt like they were at rock bottom, but they weren't giving up. And I feel like that now I'm like, we don't know where we are actually in like the larger arc. I don't think that I think this is one of the weirdest pieces of history is we don't, as much as we study it, I feel like we often don't know, like, how hot is the pot? Are we in the boiling stage? Are we pre-boiling? Have we just gotten used to being boiled all the time? Like where are we at in the process? And right now, I woke up this morning and I was like, we could also change it all right now. Like, if we're like, we don't like either of these candidates, we don't have to do this. We could change it right now. We could decide in 2024, we're not participating in this dysfunctional system anymore. We're going to do something else, right? But there has to be a decision point, and then I think there have to be compelling narratives that are like, look, like we have to start somewhere, or we have to pick up something, we can change it. And actually we have to change it. Like, if we can't change it for ourselves, we can change it on behalf of someone else. I read the Reformatory, like, oh my gosh, like I can't be a part of letting kids be in this, an experience like this. And I'm like, they are right now. So if I'm deeply moved by what's happening there, what am I doing about abolition? And especially abolition for young people. As I'm reading your book, Kung Lee, and I'm just like, oh, I don't want anyone in these circumstances of enslavement and indentured servitude. I'm like, I still feel that way. And there are still people in that circumstance. How do I bring my attention to that place right now? And I don't know, there's just something about it for me that's like, oh, there's a timelessness. Like, if I can look back and I can look forward and the same wisdom works in both directions, then I can land in the present and kind of know what to do, even if it's like we don't have the whole strategy and we're not going to get everyone on the same page. Which, when I started out as an organizer, it was all like, we've got to get everyone on the same page and then we can do something, right? And I was a facilitator for 25 years. That was my focus, was like alignment. And I still think that that's very important work. But I'm much more interested now in, like, there's actually a million stories. There's a million reasons why people will do this. We have to align between all the differences a way forward. And I feel reading these stories, to me at least, I love seeing in Begin the World Over, I love seeing how some people are truly motivated by the politic and some are just motivated by relationship, right? Some are just like, oh, is that where you're going? Well, I guess I'm going with you, And I'm like, you have to be honest about that. Like, I know so many people who are organizers because of a crush, or organizers because of a love story, or organizers because that's the community that felt like home when you were being rejected by everything else, or whatever else. I'm like, how do we politicize people from the place where they find love and comfort and say, this deserves protection, Yeah.
That's so true. The disparate soldiers in the army marching in the same direction. Sorry to use a war metaphor, but they are battles, and we can't lie to ourselves about it. The other side knows it's a battle. So
yeah, I was like,
so just like, during the civil rights era, my mom was who she was, and my dad was who he was in Indiana, where there was really nothing much happening because Jim Crow was milder. It wasn't even technically, he went to integrated schools. People were just comfortable enough that there wasn't mass student movement. And when he heard about that movement, you know, he saw my mother's picture in Jet magazine. And he was like, hey, I'm going to
go be a part of that movement.
To your point. No, I mean, he had that activist spirit, but also he had eyes. So he also went in that way. And whether it was, and it was just my mom and her sister at first. They went to a meeting. They heard about nonviolent resistance, like a path, like, oh, a core meeting, like, oh, you can go limp when the police try to move you. You can go into the lunch counter. You can, you know, and then Greensboro, they're like, we can do this. Just knock on reformatory doors. Maybe 5 people at the first meeting. And then the next thing you know, there are 1,000 people marching in the streets of Tallahassee because some of those 5 people were arrested and now get our students out of jail. And everyone is finding their reason to subject themselves to physical harm, finding their reason to subject themselves to psychological harm, all in the quest for whether a white banker who will secretly give money under the door at night for bail and never wants his name known. It's their absolutely. Everybody comes to movement together.
Absolutely. Yeah. On the individual scale, I can attest, you know, when I met Xochitl, my current partner, I was like, I'm a reformist lawyer. I'm here to make small reforms. And she said, well, I'm a revolutionary. And I said, me too.
I was like, Xochitl is an irresistible person. Like that's exactly what happens. And I
had to write myself into, you know, I had to convince myself of it, right?
Yeah, I feel like I have to give myself a new story. And also, you know, like, I mean, I've been blessed by so many revolutionizing relationships. Like I've been in so many relationships where I've learned something. I mean, like right now, I can stand 10 toes down on Palestine and really feel like I have an informed stance because I had a really deep, beautiful, intimate relationship with an anti-Zionist Jewish person. And then I had a really deep, beautiful relationship with a displaced Palestinian person. And in both relationships where I was not clear, you know, where I was like, well, why, you know, it's like, there's an answer for that. Here's why you think what you think. And, you know, there's an intimacy to the conversation that you can have, you know, pillow talk or over dinner or when you're like, I'm preparing to go meet your Zionist family. And at some point you're going to come meet my racist Southern family. And like, because we have ignorance is always one person away. And, you know, to be a human being, right, is like someone in my family is someone I would consider to be ignorant of the politics that I believe in, just like they think that about me. It's like, it's all intimate, right? Like, I think that so often our family space is actually the more conservative space. And then the relationships we form through love are radicalizing on purpose. And then we're like, okay, now I have a more radical person and I'm going to try to bring that energy through my familial system and then write about it, right? That I'm like, so much of Grievers is about this love story between this Black radical activist and this Chinese American activist and the child that they created, who's like, I don't want to do explicit organizing. I don't want to be all up in that, which Tananarive makes me think of you a little bit. Cause you're like, I grew up with these activist parents and I want to write horror. And
when my parents gave me permission to be an artist, I was so relieved. Like, oh, like my mother was like, oh, don't worry.
That's darling. The truth of who you are. That's why we do activism, so that we can all live in the truth of who we are. Right. Like, you know, fundamentally. But I also think, in the same way that you have had the experience of like life will keep pulling you back so that you're using your medicine, you're still applying your medicine for justice, right? Like each one of your books has justice woven throughout it. Characters, right? To be like, Dune still has justice woven through her system. She just has to find her role, which is what I do believe for all humans is I'm like, there's something for you to do that is justice. You're the one who has to figure out what it is. I can't tell you from outside. You know, this is where I think movement often flounders a bit because we're like, everyone needs to do this. And I'm like, no.
I had that great example.
Just I was like, parents. Not everyone's a door knocker. right?
No.
Not what, some people are really bad at door knocking, and it actually hurts our movement for them to be sent around to doors. Me, okay? I'm like, if I show up, I'm like, why are you like this? And I'm like, that's not right. Or I can't. I'm not a good police liaison, right? Because I'm just like, what your spirit, your soul, sir. You know, like there's nothing. I can't do it. So I'm like, let me write some poems and let me, interview strategists or whatever. But I want to ask each of you, I'm curious about this. Where's the next place? So having written the book that you've written and learned what it taught you, what feel like is the next place that you're going also in the fiction realm? Is there more to the story that you told? Are there actions that you want to call people towards because of the work you did? Like, just what's the trajectory?
Go first, Conley.
Yeah, I think I am working on the next book, right? It's like, what happens after the success? What happens after victory?
I'm so into that book.
What does 1856 look like in this new world? What does 2024 look like in this new trajectory? But I think a different way of answering what you're asking, like what's next, it's like I've just been thinking a lot about what's next for speculative fiction.
Yes.
Right. I just had the experience. I was watching some trailer for a movie that's about to come out about the next Civil War. Right?
Okay.
And it's just like, it was so graphic and visual and compelling, this like civil war that's about to happen on this land, and it was just like, it was Hollywood. It was done so spectacularly, and it was horrible. It was horrifying. It was like a dystopian, future. And it just made me think about just manifestation theory. The idea, like, if you can see it, your mind will track for evidence, and your mind will track for elements to make the thing true, right? And that speculative fiction, of Octavia Butler's ilk and of speculative fiction there has been a lot of dystopian, right, speculation. But whether we are at a moment right now where we need just as much speculative futures, like of the kind that we want to see put out there, right? Like what you were doing, Adrienne, with Octavia's Brood, right? On just to go to scale with that, so that we are reading over and over and over again and seeing on screen over and over and over again, right? The future that we can be having, right? The future that can come out of societal collapse, the future that could be, right? And that's the work of speculative fiction. So that's a little bit about what I'm thinking about next, is just collectively, what we should be doing.
So the Reformatory was such a long. Octavia once said in an interview about Kindred that Kindred was a long, hard write. And I feel that in my spirit. The Reformatory was a long, hard write. It was more than 10 years from the time I came up with the idea to the time it was finally published. And I don't want to do that again. And I think the reason it was so difficult was, as Gilbert King just said, who wrote Devil in the Grove, by the way, which is about the Groveland boys in Florida, and was a very important part of my research of what Jim Crow so-called criminal justice was like in Florida during that era. He was approached about writing about the Dozier School, and he said, I couldn't do it because it's too grim. It's too grim a story for Gilbert King. But nonetheless, I was trying to weather that terrible research. So part of activism is also self-care. And I'm trying to remember which book Octavia said she wrote as a reward for having written Kindred, because it was something that would be more fun. You know what I mean? So it's the same elements of highlighting history. This one more so than marching through the records of dead and abused children, which is what I had to do to write the Reformatory, is looking at messaging and Hollywood and entertainment. It's going to be an outgrowth of a short story. I just won my first World Fantasy Award for a short story called Incident at Bear Creek. Thank you. That actually gave me goosebumps. Thank you.
Woo, that's so good.
And that is set in the 70s, and it's about a boy whose mean grandmother is the mean grandmother because she was a film star in the 30s and 40s, and she made her fame and fortune by what we would call today cooning. You know, those roles where you're lazy Maisie, the housekeeper who's so bumbling, and she had the physical abilities of
no babies.
of a Carol Burnett or even a Charlie Chaplin. She would have been like a Charlie Chaplin had she been white, perhaps, or and a man. But because she was Black and a woman, she was relegated to these terrible roles. And as the NAACP starts protesting movies, she starts to feel pushed out by her own people. So really, it's a story of intergenerational trauma that starts from the eyes of this woman growing up in Gracetown, of course, because she's got a little touch of the magic. Her grandson, who will grow up to be a contemporary screenwriter. So I get to rant a little bit about what it's like to be a Black creative working in Hollywood, which I cannot wait to do. But then all of that is a creature story. It's literally about a creature in the woods chasing people, which is, I will watch that movie every time. And it's my way of hopefully having a little bit more fun, while I also help people sort of understand the impact of intergenerational trauma, specifically as it relates to Black creatives who have tried to work in Hollywood, which is the world's most powerful messaging system. And when my parents gave me permission, as I call it, to work in the arts, I remember very specifically my mother telling me, oh, in the 60s, the NAACP invested a lot of money in its Hollywood branch because they understood the importance of representation, and I'm carrying that. So what is representation? How has it been used against us? And how can we reclaim it as a tool to both educate, entertain, and, to the larger point, help create change? Because when you know what's wrong, when you can help diagnose what's wrong with something, that's the first step toward fixing it.
Yeah, I really love that. I love both of these visions of what's coming for both of you. And I love the questions you're asking yourselves. And I love the space you're giving yourself. You know, like, I think about that a lot. Is my fiction feels like some ways the most intimate writing I do. You know, like I'm like, I'm like, this is the biggest dream I actually have, or this is the deepest pain I actually feel. And I'm going to put it into this story, and I'm going to cover it with action items, but you're going to be able to also feel my heart in it. And so I think for me, what's next is I want to keep writing into that place and writing from that place. Finishing out this trilogy, I feel very sad. I've actually been struggling a lot with finishing it, even though I know, like, if I want to keep writing with these characters, I can. Wynn did that. You know, she was like, I'm going to keep writing in this world, and the heinous cycle exists or whatever. But there's also part of me that feels like the responsibility of closing out well with my characters and closing out well with Detroit, right? Like, I moved from Detroit, and I'm not like, oh, I'm done with that place forever, but I'm like, there's a certain graduation for me in the finalizing of this trilogy. I can also feel almost like root tendrils, like something reaching up around my ankles right now from North Carolina. That is like, the Carolinas are where I'm from. And it's where all my people are from, the Carolinas. And I can feel that there's something different about the relationship this land has to me and how it wants to contribute to my storytelling here. So I'm very interested in, I keep thinking of it as like work that is partnering with the earth. Like, I'm like, what is the earth? What are the stories that she really wants us to hear and know? And can I be succinct? You know, Michaela Harrison is a friend of mine, and she goes and she sings to whales, and they sing back to her, and they're like, we are one. And it's like, that's all we need to know. That's the ultimate wisdom. Can I be as precise as these whales? Even if I'm going to write a whole book to be that precise, you know? So I want to write a really big novel that is like in partnership with the earth, and that is utopian, like, you know, just socialist and utopian, and like apologetically, just like, we're getting along, and it's functional. And here's a Virgo's presentation of a functional world in which, like, the dramas are small. I'm very interested in this idea of like, Octavia always said, well, there'll be more problems. There'll be new problems. And I'm like, yeah, I want a world in which the biggest problem is a little boredom. And I'm like, how would I write that in a compelling way? Right.
I love that.
Or like the biggest problem is like someone's like, oh, I don't want to go along with the rules of everything functioning, their energy. But I'm interested, I've always been anti-utopia, or like utopia can't exist without dystopia. I'm like, well, the Virgo in me is like, someone could make this work. I think I could make it work. I can make this work, and not perfect. Again, like what you said, Tananarive, it's not about perfection. It's about what is a life that is compelling for the majority of people on Earth, and that is in right relationship with the majority of life in the universe. Right.
My husband, Stephen Barnes, talks about utopia as being a verb, not a noun. It's something to move toward. And I think that might be one of the problems in trying to write utopian literature. I love that idea, by the way. Isn't it sad? I often think it's so sad. I hear myself saying this when I teach writing. The crux of storytelling is often taught as conflict.
Yeah.
The story has not even
I remember you teaching me that.
Until there's a conflict.
I remember you saying that. It's like, what is the core conflict? And I was like, what if it was the core pleasure? Or what if it was the core, like, orgasmic opening? Or like, I was like, could it be a different thing? Yeah.
People come with like their whole different attitudes. What if we don't have to have conflict? Like even something as silly as a rom-com, which sometimes I will watch. I'm like always like, oh, this
don't
is
be
so
above
great.
it. Be above it.
Yeah. But that thing is about to happen, that misunderstanding, that text, that, because crisis and conflict are basically the currency of storytelling, traditional storytelling. And it is kind of fun to think about what it would look like to scale down the conflict so much that it's pleasure, it's enjoyment,
or like to change it into different, right? Because I'm like, when I have a new lover, for instance, like we have difference, and it creates energy. And when you're in the right match, it's like that energy is dynamic and compelling and interesting. And I'm like, I want to keep moving in that energy. I don't need you to yell at me or fight with me. I want to keep building. Like, let's build, a lot of times you're building something that feels intangible, but it's like, oh, we can both feel it. I'm like, what does it look like? What does it feel like to read books like that? For me, with a lot of the work, when I think about reading the African Immortal series, Tananarive, like to me, when she was coming into feeling her power, I was like, that's orgasmic. That to me, that's orgasmic. And then she had conflict, but I was like, but I would just read about a young girl coming into her power over and over and over.
But Adrienne, you were on when you described like there are tendrils coming up, right? Coming up your legs, like trying to grab at you. We're not talking. I think one of the characters, or it's just like this is the place, the geographic place, the Earth is one of your. Is what you're writing, right?
That's my muse. That's my everything.
Right? It's like the fundamental conflict might be with that. Like, how are you going, right? Like,
especially for someone like me, where I'm like, I can't plant. Like I had someone come and like landscape my yard for me because I was like, I think if it looks pretty, then I'll be better at taking care of it. But I think of myself as really earth challenged. Like I'm so in love with the earth, but I don't know how to speak her language. And I'm trying to learn.
Yeah.
And that's also when I write, I'm always putting my characters in the way of having to study something about how to be in right relationship with the earth. Like for Grievers, I had to learn about canning. I had to process and be like, okay, here's what it is like to can things that you then are eating 6 months later. And I'm like, okay, I'm still not great at it, but I know how to do it. I know how to make bread. I know how to help babies come into the world. I'm like, I want to learn the South, right? Like my parents took me away from the South because they were like, it's too racist. And we're going to bring you back when it's a little less racist. This is like in the 80s. They were like, we're going to go out of country. I'm like, no, I'm back. And I want to know everything the South wants to tell the world about how to be. And the earth here is like so conversant. Everywhere, if you really tune in, but like it feels so unconcreted and like there's still so much fecundity and Yeah, it's just so loud. It's as loud here. Like in Detroit, what felt the loudest to me was the ghost of buildings. I was always driving around like I can see what was here. All these buildings that are still vibrant. Like there's an energy of the buildings. There's an energy of the ghosts. It's like New Orleans has that too, where you just drive around and you're like, oh my gosh, like I am not alone. Like 1,000 spirits are riding my back. Like it's just so intense. Here, like maybe the ghosts have been integrated more into the dirt, and it's just like there's something else coming up. Yeah. Direction of spiritual energy is different.
It's so funny you say that, Adrienne, because my parents moved from upstate Florida. I was born in Tallahassee.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wait, y'all were both from Tallahassee?
Yeah, I was born in the FAMU University Hospital back when they had one. And
really
they moved
wild.
us to Miami for so-called better education and whatnot. And they also moved me into concrete and air conditioning and away from roots.
Yes.
And while I was hiding from that very early in my career, I felt very ill-equipped, for example, to be a quote-unquote Black writer, and was writing white characters, honestly, all through college, through grad school, because I didn't see myself in Black literature canon. There was no suburban Black literature. It was all rural Black literature. I did not know how to write rural. So in a weird way, the Reformatory is like my homecoming in that sense too. It's like the book I was always afraid I would have to write. But then by the time I wrote it, I was ready to write it. And when my mother moved back to her hometown and I started visiting, I started writing my Gracetown stories to implant myself back in her history. Interesting you talk about the dirt, because some of the first passages that came to me in Gloria's voice were talking about the soil and how red the soil was, and maybe it was so red because it was soaked with blood.
Yeah, I mean, it's loud. Like I'm working on the 3rd book of the trilogy, and I went to sit by the Eno River, and the river literally was like, you can't have a utopia. You gotta let it go. And I've been working on the book already for like 3 months. I thought I had a handle on it. It was like in August or something. Like, you gotta go. And I was like,
you got notes from the river.
I know. I was like, well, you can't argue with Eno. I mean, she's right. She's but I also think there's something, and maybe we can go here for a second as we close out, guys. I know we're at time, but if there's something about how you write, like how you feel the comfort of your own writing, because to me, like hearing that and being like, oh, I know what to do now. Like I'm going to go and I'm going to write. And there's a comfort to being like, oh, this is a problem I can solve. Like I can spend some time with the page, and it may or may not be the right answer in the world, but I can spend some time and comfort myself and write my way through this. I've written over 100 pages since October 7th. Of like just ways through, and it's like all Palestine, it's all about borders, it's all about everything. I may never publish it, but being able to be like, I'm gonna write some fiction about how this night could go differently on some of these big bombardment nights. I'm gonna write poems about these people I've fallen in love with who are now dead, like because that's part of what we're experiencing right now. Or I write odes to Bisan, or I write odes to Motaz, or whatever. But it's just like the writing actually is a comfort. If it does nothing else, even if it's not good fiction or good writing, there's something about being like, I'm a co-writer of this world.
Yeah.
And
And the world is so, I mean, how can it not be part of what you're writing? How can it not be everything? You're writing the present. You're writing the present, right?
Yes.
No, I'd say, in this follow-up, in this sequel, one of the moments will be 1851, which asks the question, right? 75 years after a nation has been established. So United States, I'm giving away the ending. The United States truncated, like becomes an 11-state country, an 11-state nation, right? But it still exists.
Yeah.
And so this question of what do you do when you have when you have a small imperialist, like violent country that has been on this land for 75 years and now wants to expand, and there are the Confederation of Indigenous People who want them out. Like, what happens? How do you do that? How does this work? Right? And of course, that's the question. That's a present day question.
Yes.
And the process of writing is my excuse for being able to engage with, like, so it's like it has, like, so everything that is happening has a place to go. And I don't know if there's anything that this story will figure out, but
we educate ourselves as we work,
We do.
Yeah, I don't know anything about snow, but I'm about to write a book with a snow creature, and I'm about to learn.
Listen, you're going to learn so much. And I mean, the thing that's so beautiful is, like, we learn about what is, and we also learn about what can be, and then we fuse the two, right? Like, I really feel like that's the work of fiction writers. Like, I'm a Trekkie kid, right? Like, I grew up in a world where there were already iPads and, like, machines that would just produce food out of nowhere, and I could teleport. Like, that's where my I'm like, I started there. Someone wrote those things. All those things will come to pass, at some point. And that's how I write too. Is I'm just like, it might not exist for 50 years. It might not exist. It might be like aliens have to bring it to us, but, like, we should definitely write it. We should dream it. We should definitely articulate that that's what we would like. I keep writing love notes to aliens as well, just being like, just planting the seed that y'all are benevolent and that you can help us and that you would be so moved to do so, right? So I'm like, oh, we need it.
At the very least, rescue us.
Rescue us, but the benevolence matters. I'm like, I want you to be as sexually pleasurable as the Uloi if you're gonna disrupt my system. So,
and ultimately, it may be we are the aliens that you are writing to, right? Because
I know that's why. Have you seen Interstellar?
Mm-mm.
So Interstellar it's a flawed movie, but it's one of my very favorite things because, spoiler of the movie is basically that the alien force is really us, but it's across time and space and different capacities, right? Like, what we think of as other is always us, but it's just us from some other place or time. And I feel like a lot of my writing, a lot of what I read from y'all is that too, that I'm like, this is us. This is us in the Reformatory. This is us in the Haitian Revolution. This is us in the Deep South. This is us in Detroit. This is us.
What a great capper too, because wherever we go in time, there we are.
Here we are. And there's work to do. Yeah. ER, could you come back on and wrap us up?
Yes.
Hi,
thank
darling.
you. Hi. I just love y'all and appreciate you all so much. Just reflecting on the richness that you brought to my life, and then also just knowing all of the people in the larger Charis community whose lives have been enriched by your work. So thank you all. Thanks to this amazing chat. Many people were like, yo, this chat is its own beautiful thing. So thank you to everybody for being with us. There were some great questions here. So if y'all want to just look at these questions so that you can see the things people are interested in about your work, just so you know. I know we don't have time for them.
How do we see the? Oh, I see them. Okay, hold on.
They're in the little question mark.
I know, I'm on my phone, everyone. Okay. My Wi-Fi is broken, so I was like, where is it?
Yes, sorry. Beautiful questions, beautiful comments. Thank you to our beautiful community around the world watching with us today. We will be putting this on our YouTube channel as well. So if there's folks, I know this is the middle of a work day, a lot of folks couldn't be here, but they can watch it on the replay. We'd love for you to share it. And, again, this is Charis's 50th birthday year. So we're dreaming into the future. We're thinking about 2074. Charis was founded in 1974. We're in the past, we're in the present, and we're dreaming about what does feminism look like in 2074, right? So y'all are a big part of how we have dreamed revolutionary and liberatory dreams. And I think we invite you all to continue having these explorations with us through literature, through fiction, especially, but also through our political work together. So thank you for all you do. And I hope that you stay safe and well, and no more colds, no more flus.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And Tungli, thank you for having the idea of all of this coming together. This is really good.
So fun.
All anyone has to do is click this teal button at the bottom center of the screen to buy all the books from Charis. So it's just one button, and you'll go straight to the page where you can buy all the books. You can pick and choose, but they're all there. So one click, it'll get you there. It really does help us when you buy books from Charis. So
you're the best, Charis.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Appreciate it. Have a good day.